All right, so this year was our first year with this garden here, and we were really struggling. It was an uphill battle with the weeds the whole time, and we did get some harvest, which I was very surprised that we actually got a bunch of carrots.
Lots of tomatoes,
Yeah.
some peppers and some beans, and tons of cucumbers.
But the issue is, it's just, I think that we're getting robbed with all the weeds and stuff, and so what we're asking is, what would you recommend to do to move forward for next season?
Well, a couple of things referenced for a lot of the viewers and subscribers. You need to realize that there's this idea that you know, if things get bad and I live in the suburbs or whatever, I'm going to tear up a part of my yard and I'll put in a garden. That you just please understand, the nutrient deficiency that's in the soils in this country is terrible. And what you really have to do is look at what type of produce you're going to use, what do you really need for the family, and then figure out some type of soil enrichment program to get the nutrient levels to a place where it really does produce an awful lot of produce. And so what I always recommend in gardens like this, even on you can do this on a first-year garden, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever. Instead of, most people for a garden will go ahead and tear up a whole large area. What we did is we used to raise commercial produce, and we did that down in Missouri, and we took tons of produce down, a truckload out of a garden this size. We would take a 1-ton truckload every week.
Wow.
And you can get that same thing here. What we did was we actually started gardening in strips. A strip is just whatever the width of your tilling equipment is, or whatever size that you want it. You would tear up that strip, and then you would put your nutrients in that strip, and then in between is your walk paths. And you want to go ahead and keep that as your walk path, because then you end up with compaction. The more compacted the soil is, the less the roots are able to go out. The less roots, the less nutrients that they can take up. And there's 100 other things we can talk about for hours on that as well. But basically what you want to do is figure out strips where you're going to want your production and what type of production, because different plants have different widths. All plants, basically whatever the size of the foliage is the size of the root system. So if your plants are that wide, your roots are that wide. If your plants are that wide, your roots are that wide, you know. So you're going to put a strip down through there. And the best time to do a soil enrichment program is like right now. There's 2 ways of doing it. If you do it now, you can take your wonderful natural fertilizer and soil enrichment program that you have from your animals.
Winnie the Pooh.
Nice.
Not the same kind.
And you can actually, instead of fertilizing the whole garden, just do like a 12 or 16 inch row, and then go ahead and mound that up. And that, a lot of people would say, well, you know, you got to have manure is either too hot or it's too rich. No, if you do it in the fall, what happens is over the fall, the freezing, the thawing, the rain, the snow will drive all those nutrients down into the ground instead of being spread out over in your poo pile.
It's poopery.
It's poopery. You want to narrow that and have a soil enrichment zone in your garden. And over the winter, what happens is those nutrients will leach deeper and deeper into the ground. And by springtime, then you don't have to worry about the manure being too hot.
Gotcha.
If you're going to, you can do it also in the spring, but you know, like
Then
we
you're
talked
running
about,
a risk.
then you're running the risk of burning your plants or over fertilizing. You can use compost in that same way, but compost really, you want your nutrients at like 100, 100, 100 parts per pound, and compost is like 0.5. So in order to get the nutrients in the ground, I always recommend in the fall, just it doesn't matter, you can do it right on the grass, you can do it right in your garden right here, but just do it in zones, mound it up, and let Mother Nature build that fertilizer zone for you.
Now, what about tilling in the spring? Or should we till it now or just wait?
I would wait. Right now, if you did it with the moisture that's in the ground, you're going to end up with a lot of clumps, a lot of compaction. So we just never tilled anything. And all the weeds and the grass and everything else, leave it. That ends up rotting right there in place, and that raises your nitrogen level, actually.
Okay.
Okay. So now what about for mulch? What kind of mulch should we use? I mean, does the size of the chunks of mulch matter? How do you think about that?
Well, there's a couple different ways. There's a big thing about this back to Eden garden with sawdust and things along that line. In this part of the country, that would work partially. It really needs to be a couple grow zones farther south, for the simple fact that with wood chips and most mulch and things along that line, the problem is that the wood chips is such a high carbon density that it takes a long time for that to break down into potash. I mean, you're talking about 3 to 10 years.
Wow.
Before that to actually leach down into that. Now, I'm not saying don't use wood chips. I would usually put that into a pile, mixed manure in it, and that'll help break it down faster and helps make a really good high potash level compost, which is what you want for fruiting vegetables. But for us, for mulch, you know, what we really do is we just go out here and get grass or whatever, or weeds or whatever, and we just kind of mulch around. Old hay works good. What most people don't realize is if you have a lot of weed pressure in a garden, that's a sign that you have certain nutrients that weeds like and that your plants don't like. And what you have, when you start doing a soil enrichment program, that switches, and your weed pressure becomes extremely low.
Oh, cool.
And the other part of that is that...
Excuse me.
Hallelujah.
My, oh my. Sorry, indigestion.
What also happens when you do it in small strips and keep your compaction in your rows, you'll just run your lawnmower.
Somebody wants to be in the video.
Right, right.
You don't have to worry about weeding in between. It's just around the plants. And usually you only have to weed around the plants until the canopy, and then that'll take care of a lot of the weed pressure by itself. But when you start doing that, your soil will be what's called friable, or so loose. That
friable?
Friable, F-R-I-A-B-L-E.
Okay.
It becomes really loose and non-compacted. You'll actually be able to do your gardening with your fingers.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Like our garden.
Right.
You're able to go in there and pull up your potatoes or whatever. You don't use a fork or anything. You just go in there by hand and pull it out and let it go back in there, because all your nutrients are there, all your microbes are there. You'll have tons of earthworms, and they get used to living in that fertilizer zone.
Oh, nice.
Okay, awesome.
All right, well, let's go talk about the field. Trying to get this thing back into usable hay with the big caveat of this is not our farm yet, and so we have to respect the desires of the owners. So we're going to assume that we own this farm in the spring.
Right.
Well, we'll look at that a couple different ways. A couple different options give you some flexibility there.
Let's go check it out. Okay, this field, with the caveats, obviously, we want to make sure that that we're assuming that this will be ours in the spring, because we're doing all the banking stuff. And what we do know about this field is that there were farmers that were renting the hay field, and it got wet, and they went through there anyway, even though it was too wet, and they made a bunch of ruts. So what do we need to do to get, basically here's the scoop. I'm tired of paying for hay.
Yep.
And we need a better hay, because the cow needs to produce milk for Grace and us, and cheese and milk and butter and all that kind of stuff. So where would you go with this?
All right, a couple different things. Number one, you mentioned something about farmers that you've talked to. So you have some of the historical information or background. So what we're basically going to do is look at, you know, what are you wanting to use it for, which we already know is for milk production. So for milk production is entirely different, what's called relative feed value. You want a fairly high relative feed value because it produces a much better milk product. Feed values are, the scale is anywhere from 0 to 200 plus. And you want to be kind of in that upper 150 to 200 relative feed value for dairy cattle. Lower than that, you feed the beef cattle, not a big deal. You're just going to turn those into cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
But for dairy, it's a little bit different. Just looking out across to here, a lot of the grasses that I'm seeing is an awful lot of orchard grass, which is the high end of that scale, so that's a plus. And so what we're looking at is on the whole entire property, are we going to divide it up into grazing area? Is there going to be part of it that's going to be dedicated for hay? You know, there's a lot of different options. And when we're looking at those options, there's really 3 different ways we can look at it. Number one, the least expensive and the easiest thing to do is that at right times of the year, we would actually go through and just mow everything.
Just knock it down.
Just knock it completely down. What you're doing is taking all that foliage on top and turning it into compost or fertilizer. Okay. And doing it at right times of the year, you're allowing the weeds to go ahead, the weed seed to germinate, come up, and then you mow that down before it has a chance to reproduce more seeds.
Gotcha.
I mean, you always have wind seeds blowing in from wherever, but at least the majority of them will be gone after the first season. So we can go that route. The second route, and I understand you don't own the property yet, so this is, if that all works out, that's the caveat. The second thing would be is to go through and actually do a burn off. That's going to help us because what it does is, first of all the overburden that's on top of there, we can actually burn that and turn that into instant potash. And like we talked about in the garden, you know, if we get our nutrient levels up, that's going to help, you know, the foliage that is the forage that is there. So then the other advantage to burning off is that it instantly tells you how the ground is contoured, what ruts are there, what rocks are there, if there's any garbage that's laying in the grass that you can't see. Because most farmers that have large farm equipment, I mean, understand this, a tractor tire is going to be, you know, $1,000 to $3,000 a piece. That's why they don't want to come and just mow things down, because it's too expensive. So the second option would be to burn it off and then see what's there and try to nurture what is there to get it to grow, to get you the hay that you need. The third option, which is the most expensive, is to go through and just till everything, compact it back down where you need it, and then put in the seeds that you want, whether it's alfalfa, clover, orchard grass, timothy, things along that line.
So it sounds to me like, assuming everything goes well, we're thinking probably option 2, the burning, right?
I mean, that's you, baby.
That's
I don't know.
Well, it's one of those things I would actually help you with. We'd have to get permits and get all that done.
You just can't light a bunch of Roman candles out there?
You could. Depends on
exciting.
How deep your pockets are if it gets when it gets out of control.
Right.
Yeah.
I've burned, you know, ours, we did 40 and 60 acres at a time, but you have to manage it and plan it. And that's all. That would make a great video series on how to do controlled burns.
Sure.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is figure out how we're going to section it up for grazing and or hay production.
Okay.
You know, you take a lot of things into consideration. The type of equipment, the size of equipment dictates the size of the field, and then what type of forage is there, and the list goes on and on. So those are all things that we can look at, especially this spring. But you know, this part of the country has a lot of high relative feed value grasses already in it. So that's a big plus for you all. That'll help a lot.
Cool. Well, seeing that it's pretty chilly out here, I think my nose is frozen.
Yeah.
But let's go on inside, and I want to talk about the tractor and implements that we can do and what we can't do, yada yada.
We can do that.
Okay, now it's a lot warmer.
Yes.
You know the tractor, it's Ford 8N, 1948. You got it running like a top. And now the question I have is, we have probably in the neighborhood of 20 acres that's just grass. What is it that I'm going to be able to use this for? Because I understand it's an older tractor, horsepower issues. And will it cut the mustard? You know, what will I be able to be effective with it?
Yes and no. Having a Ford 8N, they are a wonderful utility tractor, and I'm sure you covered a lot of the data or whatever on production levels things on that line. It's basically a 20 to 24 horse tractor. You're gonna these were not necessarily made for full-blown farm production, but they will handle up to 20 acres. You just got to get your implements and your thinking geared toward 20 horse instead of 45, 50, or like when we went to the farm show, those
massive tractors. More power.
Yeah, we got to go down.
Yeah.
But this one here will, it'll cut hay, a sickle bar, a pole behind sickle bar mower. This will run that. It'll run the rake. It'll run all different kinds of things for hay production. It's probably a little too light for running a hay baler, a square baler, which is for most small homesteads. I highly recommend doing all your hay in small square bales. The children, the teenagers, wives, it's just easier for everybody to haul around 50-pound bales, and it's a great way to learn work ethics. You ask our children about that, they swear I tried to kill them, but our children are hands down, they're just awesome. They have an astounding work ethic, and they've turned into wonderful young adults. But some other implements you would look at would be a small disc, maybe a 2-bottom plow. It'll do a lot of that. If when we start looking at the fields this spring, if it looks like we're going to need a larger section, we might borrow or rent or pay a farmer to come in and with his bigger equipment and then do it and then be done. Right. So, but that would be like plan C or D. We'll see what happens.
Saving money.
Saving money. That's one of the great blessings of being on a homestead. The idea is you're trading money for time.
Yeah.
And anytime that you can take the time and effort to do it, you're going to end up with a far better quality product, a far better quality life.
Amen.
And that's why we all do this.
Well, a lot to learn, a lot to do, and we're very grateful.
Yes.
We are too. I understand this. This has been a huge blessing for all of us involved. I mean, it is hands down a two-way street. Brad and Christa have been a huge blessing, and all the things they know. How does she say it? They're wicked smart.
Wicked smart.
and for us to have the practical side of it and having all those years experience, having our own farm, being raised on a farm, and to be able to share that has been a real blessing.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there it is, guys. Lot to do. It's just like
I'm gonna go scour the shopper for some
the shopper. Well, they don't know what the shopper is.
No, it's our local newspaper that comes out once a week.
Yeah, she loves the shopper.
I do.
And we've been told that the farmers around here, one of the main reasons
no, that's the other paper.
Oh, the other paper, Star.
This is Star. You have to pay for that one. The shopper's free.
People are obsessed with the obituaries.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, why? If you knew that person, you would know that they were having trouble and they passed.
Oh no, not around here. Just because you're related to them doesn't mean you communicate with them.
Oh gosh.
Well, building community.
Yeah.
But
one tractor at a time.
Right.
All right, so I'm Brad.
I'm Christa.
I'm Prep Stetter Bob.
You guys have an amazing day.